Today we return to the fields of Pennsylvania in July 1863, and the story. The Battle of Gettysburg. 3 fateful days that saved a nation. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an unchangeable object? In July 1863, that question was answered not in theory, but in blood, on the fields of a small Pennsylvania town that no one had ever heard of, Gettysburg. This is not just a battle. These are 3 fateful days when the fate of the United States hung in the balance, a confrontation where the courage of ordinary soldiers shaped the future of an entire nation. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Journey Through History. To understand the magnitude of Gettysburg, we must look at the context of the American Civil War. In the summer of 1863, the Confederate Army, under the command of the legendary General Robert E. Lee, seemed invincible on the Eastern Front. After his resounding victories, General Lee decided to make his boldest gamble yet: take the war to the North. He invaded Pennsylvania with 2 goals: to destroy the will of the North, to fight, and to force President Abraham Lincoln to sign a peace treaty, recognizing Southern independence. Meanwhile, the Union Army was in disarray. They had just won a major battle, were in a state of disarray, and had a brand new commander, General George Meade, who had been in office for only 3 days. On one side was the victorious, confident army. On the other side was the defending army, bewildered. The stage was set for history. And interestingly, none of them had planned to fight at Gettysburg. The battle began by accident. A Confederate unit entered Gettysburg to look for boots, and they caught up with the Union cavalry, led by Brigadier General John Buford. Buford, an experienced cavalry officer, immediately recognized the strategic importance of the area. He found the hills and mountains that ran south of the town. He knew that whoever controlled the high ground would have a huge advantage. Although he was vastly outnumbered, Buford made a decisive decision to hold his corps at all costs until the main force of the Union arrived. The first shots of the Battle of Gettysburg were fired right where I was standing. Buford's cavalry fought hard, slowing the Confederates for many precious hours. When the Union infantry reached the library, a fierce battle broke out. But then the Confederates arrived in force. The Union defense was thin. They were forced to retreat in a savage fashion, running through the streets of Gettysburg. It seemed like a disaster. But in the darkest hour, a hero emerged. General Winfield Scott Hancock, one of the North's most talented generals, arrived. He was undaunted. With his talent and charisma, he rallied the retreating soldiers, calmed them, and ordered them to establish a strong defense on the high ground south of town, Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. By the first night, the Union had been defeated, but they still held the most important thing: the strategic hills. They had formed a solid defensive line shaped like a stylish skirt, a near-perfect defensive position. The second day of the battle was considered the bloodiest. General Lee decided to attack both flanks of the Union's fishhook line, hoping to build them. The fiercest fighting took place on the Union left, at places with horrors such as Devil's Cave, Wheatfield, Peach Orchard. The 2 sides fought for every inch of land in terrible hand-to-hand fighting. And here, on the top of this small hill, Little Round Top, one of the most legendary stories of the American Civil War took place. This position was the leftmost point of the entire Union Army. If they failed, the Confederates could sweep in behind and destroy the entire army. The men tasked with holding out here were Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and the 20th Maine Regiment. They fought off wave after wave of the corps. They fought to the point of exhaustion. And then, the worst happened. They ran out of ammunition. In that moment of crisis, Chamberlain, a college professor before the war, gave a mad but brilliant order. He commanded his men, "Fire bayonets! Charge!" The weary Maine men shouted in unison and charged down the hill like a storm, bayonets flashing. The Confederates, surprised and confused by this field action, broke up and fled. By sheer force of will and courage, Chamberlain and his men studied the Union Army. On the right flank, at Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, fierce, unthreatening fighting continued into the night. By the end of the second day, casualties on both sides were incalculable. Thousands had fallen, but the Union line, miraculously, remained intact. By the third day, General Lee believed that after attacking on both flanks, the Union center must now be its weakest point. He decided to throw all his weight behind him for one last gamble, a frontal assault on the heart of the enemy line on Cemetery Ridge. His close general, James Longstreet, argued vehemently that it would be suicidal, but General Lee had made up his mind. At noon on July 3, the attack began with the largest artillery duel in North American history. More than 150 Confederate guns fired grenades into the Union lines for 2 hours, shaking the ground. And then, the guns fell silent. From the woods, a majestic but terrifying scene emerged. 500 Confederate soldiers, lined up a full yard wide, began marching across the open field, straight toward the Union lines. This was Pickett's charge. They marched straight into a fire of guns and rifles. Thousands fell, but they kept going. A handful of the most adventurous actually held the Union lines for a moment, creating the Confederate Ridge, before being driven back. The attack was a complete failure. Only half of the 500 men returned. When General Lee came out to greet the survivors with a broken face, he said, "It's all my fault." The Battle of Gettysburg was over. More than 50 of the 2 men were killed, wounded, or missing in those 3 days, making Gettysburg the bloodiest battle in American history. A few months later, at the dedication of the cemetery, President Abraham Lincoln came and delivered a speech that lasted only 2 minutes, but became immortal. He said that these soldiers had sacrificed not only to study the Union, but also so that this nation could have a new birth of freedom, a new birth of liberty, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The Gettysburg Address redefined the war's purpose. The Battle of Gettysburg was the decisive turning point of the Civil War. General Lee's army had lost its offensive power and would never again invade the North. The path to Union victory, long and bloody as it was set. But more than a military victory, Gettysburg is a memorial reminder of the price of unity, of human courage in the face of challenge, and of the sacrifices necessary for a nation to be saved and reborn. Thank you for joining us in this epic story. Please share the video to honor the sacrifices of those who fell here. Goodbye, and see you on the next journey through history.